G'day all, Graham Jeffs here. Today is the 8th of November, 1300 hours, 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. in Melbourne. And today I'm joined by Tane Raquel. Tane is a 30-year veteran of activism and advocating of the law and language. Okay, he has taken on the legal systems and their corporate masters over those 30 years. And as is their tactic, they always, enter something, and he always appeals, and he's never lost on appeal. So he has simplified and systemized winning formulas for the peoples of the earth to overcome maritime law and stand in rule of law. Today, we're going to speak about maritime law versus rule of law. And just so that people know, I've been studying with Tane for some time now, and his knowledge just has to be shared. His knowledge and his experience is exactly what we need right now. So for those of you who are listening in today and have questions, we're quite happy to take your questions by email. Post the details in the text of this. But without further ado, let me welcome Tane. Welcome, mate.
G'day, mate. How are you? Thanks for having me and taking the time. I'm really excited to share this knowledge out with your audience. And it's time. I've been in isolation for 4 or 5 years, contemplating my next moves and what I need to do after leaving New Zealand. And landing in Australia. So I'm very excited, and thank you again.
Pleasure. So you're going to explain to us today, there's a lot of talk around about what jurisdiction we're actually in here in this land and all over the world, and the word maritime law comes up quite often. And a word that doesn't come up very often is rule of law. Could you explain to us, in your words, the difference between the maritime law that we seem to be enduring at the moment and the rule of law that we're entitled to?
Yeah, it's you've got to start at the core, and the core is intent. Where's intent lie in any case? So you've got to have an injured party. If there's no injured party, there's no intent. So then where do you place that into? Well, there's 2 cups. There's a cup called equity, which is the context. Context is equity. The content is rule of law, where we, the people, make the determinations on jurisdiction. And that all is premised on survival. The root to everything is how we survive as a collective group. Whether you're a blade of grass, a monkey, or a human being, everything comes down to strategy and tactics on our survival. The second cup is maritime law. And that's the context. In the content is a word called jurisprudence. Now that's the fiction of law. It's determined and under a set of rules by a court system, and judges have discretion in the interpretation. But it's all premised on language, and this is the misunderstanding of people's language when they go to court. They think they're going for justice, and it's not got anything to do with justice. The promissory notes, or the documents that you offer up, are called promissory notes. And the judge collects them on the bench, which is bank, and he administrates a credit or a debit. I've done a case in New Zealand where the opposition charged me with threatening to kill. And all they did was offer rebuttals to everything they said. And I rebutted every word, every sentence, every paragraph in the document. We offered it up. The judge turned to the Crown Solicitor, QC, and said, have you got anything else? And she said, no. He dismissed the case because it's about banking. It's not about justice. And this is where the area of mistakes are made in court. The second area of mistakes is not knowing who you are. So you've got to go and learn who you are. Are you John Henry Doe, all capitals? Or are you John Henry? John Henry is equity law, rule of law. Because what is equity? Equity is a set of maxims. One of the maxims is first in law is best in law. So John Henry was before John Henry Doe. So when I appeared in court, I would never consent to John Henry Doe. So the other word is consent. But all the judge is interested in is banking, and he needs to bank the contract that's before him. And there's the two laws, contract and trust law. So he's trying to get the contract into maritime law. And so he can harvest you and harvest your trust account. That's all his intent. He's not interested in right and wrong. You are when you think you're going to court for justice, but it's not about that. It's about commerce. Now, equity law is about fairness. It's about right and wrong. And common law, which is another word that's been misrepresented, is a set of terms within statutes, legislation, or precedents. So once a judge gets a set of precedents, he's going to pull those precedents down to rule against your case.
So just let me ask a question there, because there is a confusion. So what you're saying is maritime law is of the dead.
It's a dead system. It's the whole system is administration of the dead. When your mother signed over and sold you to the Crown, they became the administrators, and under the Cester VQ Trust, you were then shanghaied, put on a ship, and lost at sea. So you're dead, like the three monkeys. You can't see, can't hear, can't speak. You need a special license to represent in a court system or in the system. So there, it's all deceptive. The whole system is about the dead. They do not have any jurisdiction over the living. They have no contracts over the living. So when I identified that, I then did forensics and how do I get to become alive again? And it's presented in the Cester VQ Trust. Once you prove that you're alive and you come back from sea, you can take over the trust and become living. Then you have no contract with the system or courts really. And the biggest thing when I've presented this before is people say, well, how do I get the dole? How do I get my pension? How do I survive? Well, there's a process, and that's in the learning how to go from the living to the dead. The other thing I learned in my journey was I started suing the police force or department. But remember, they're dead. They don't create the injury. So I found another word called use. The individual operators, like the sergeant, the constable, he's using the system to place fines or offers of contracting. So he's liable for any injury or damages. So what I did was I go, okay, I don't need to go and write invoices against the police department. I need to get the individual because he's offering the contract and I have no contract. So I invoice him and take him to court. I remember in Papakura courts, I went into the court and I just said to the Crown, have you got any disclosure for me? And she didn't. And I said, well, great, I'm just here for the order because I'm going to sue you. She said, what? I said, yeah, I'm going to sue you for using documents for pecuniary gain. She said, how do I get a pecuniary gain? I said, are you on a salary? She said, yes. I said, there's your pecuniary gain. Went down, took my seat in court. Case was called. She stood up and she withdrew the case.
Right.
She didn't want to be billed. I did a clerk of the court. I ran this case because I was doing forensic on the capital name, and it went through the court, came back, the decision was 200 hours of PD, and it was all in capital name. And then when it came down to the clerk, she converted it from capital letters down to lowercase. I said, that's a private name, and I have the right to that name, not you. She said, oh, that's nonsense. I said, if you do it, and I warned her 3 times, I'll be back here to charge you for using documents for pecuniary gain. See, I don't go down the civil route. I go down the criminal route because we're all equal under law.
Right.
So I then go down the criminal route and I charged her with using documents for pecuniary gain.
Yep.
Came back and I served the Donna. She went hysterical. You can't do this. I said, well, I've done it. She was so upset that she took leave. I got a phone call from the court manager saying, how do we make this go away? She's 30 years. She'll lose her superannuation. She'll lose her job because a member can't have criminal charges while working for the government. So when you understand equity law and rule of law and the law, you use it against them.
Right. So the
manager.
Can I just jump in just before you go on? Can I just jump in? So it seems pretty obvious that maritime law is all based on the dead. How did you mention the birth certificate? How did that happen? How did we get into maritime law?
Well, just let me finish this, because when the senior court manager said, how do we go get rid of this? I said, well, return everything back to its status. She said, okay, I'll get the judge to do that. And I said, you won't need the judge because I know that you sign off the orders. She said, oh, okay. So she signed it off. We went back to the original. I never did those 200 hours. They were cancelled because the dead can't do any work. The dead can't pay the bills. The dead can't write a mortgage. The dead can't drive cars. So the whole system is deceptive. So to answer your question about the birth certificate, there's 2. There's the born certificate, which is John Henry. Then there's the second birth certificate, which is the John Henry Doe. And they administrate the debt because your mother, and you'll see it on your birth certificate, she was the informant. So what's an informant? Somebody knocks on criminals for the police. So they're an informant. So she gave private information to the Crown for the harvesting of the living man or the living child. So she sold and made application to the Crown to take over the jurisdiction of the child and take care of it. So now there's, if you go back to Adam and Eve bit the apple and fell out of the Garden of Eden. What was the Garden of Eden? The spiritual concept. We were naked in spirit. We weren't in form. And then we bit the apple. We then had guilt, shame, doubt, and we clothed ourselves up. And then we went into duality, yin, yang, black, white, north, south, commercial. We went into the commercial scene of duality. So you became a debtor or a creditor. That's the language. So persons, if you draw a T and put creditor and debtor, the debtor is the person, the debt, being administrated by the dead system government. Now the government is a state of Australia, United States of Australia, which is Perth, Melbourne, they're all states. But the correct language for states is Easter. So the states and the Prime Minister and the ministers are administrating the estate for the dead. And they're licensed to do that until the dead return from the sea and take over their estates. And the states are a member of the United Nations. So all around the world, United States of America, all the different states are joined with the United Nations. And they administrate the money for the states. And they draw down money to give the state the power to run hospitals, run roading and everything like that for the dead. So that's a construct. When you understand legal is a fiction under jurisprudence in the context of maritime law. And it's by consent. They're not fraud. They're not charlatans. It's us that don't understand the language that give them consent. Every day you're giving consent by your language that you don't understand. So, Graham, would you share an apple with me?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
So there's the issue. People just make statements. So debtors make statements. Creditors always ask the question, what do you mean by apple? What do you mean by apple, Graham?
Well, something you eat.
Something to eat, a piece of fruit.
Yep.
And that's your statement, and that's your consent given in your reality. But for me, an apple is a computer. And that's what happens in court. They have their own language, they have their own dictionary, they have their own meanings. And because you're not asking questions before contracting, you give consent. Even when you argue, you're giving consent because you're treated as a dead, belligerent infant. And you're in the court to be harvested. Right. And the beast gets fed. Like all these people doing protests, I love them. They put a lot of energy in them. Then they get fines. They get fined for $1,500 for a mask not being worn. They get fines. And that's feeding the beast. The beast is commerce. And it needs to be fed. So my weapon of choice has always been not to feed the beast. If you want to kill a disease, what do you got to do, Graham? You got to stop feeding it. Mm. We keep feeding it. We want our sovereignty. We want our freedom, but we're domesticated. We're still in the fence. We still walk up to get milked and get a bit of feed and then set free. And we got that habit, that creature of habits where we're just institutionalized and we've been domesticated. We don't know how to live amongst the wild. We're all First Nations. We're all born from the Creator on earth. And if you read Genesis 1:26, which I'm not quoting religion, I'm just quoting law. And it says, we were created in the image of God, and He gave us dominion over earth and all of its creatures. We have the living man, the First Nation people have dominion over earth. So that's the contract we have with God. That's the law. It's not legal. That's the law in equity and rule of law. Context, content. Where the question from the creditor, he asks, and like I do, every time I say, am I entitled to full disclosure? And I was in the Papakura court with Judge Singh, and he said, would I swear on the Bible? And I said, yes, Your Honor, I'll swear on the Bible. He said, do you want to affirm? No, I'll swear on the Bible, Your Honor. The clerk the register brought the Bible over, I put my hand on, and I said, holy shit, in open court. And the judge startled. He said, what are you doing? I said, Judge, did you not tell me to swear on the Bible? He said, yes, but not like that. I said, well, Judge, am I entitled to full disclosure? He says, yes. I said, well, you show me your dictionary and I'll show you mine. Because they operate in the Black Laws Dictionary and you're not exposed to that, but you're in court trying to understand their language. Without the dictionary, you have no chance.
Is this why they ask quite often when you're picked up by the coppers or you're in court, they ask you, do you understand?
Absolutely, because what's the meaning of understanding? It means to stand under. They're getting you to consent. The word consent is their weapon. They must intimidate you, threaten you, whatever, to get consent. I went in one case, I went before the judge, I took my born certificate, I took my birth certificate. He called the name. I said, Your Honor, I'm here on appearance. I believe you're looking for this character. And if you get your birth certificate and certified by the Registrar General, he will say that he's holding the name on the birth certificate in custody. In custody. So I'm sorry, Your Honor, he can't appear because he's in custody. But here's his certificate. So you might have to get the registrar to bring him down here. So you've got to understand the language that they're talking. So I went to walk out and they arrested me and put me through another judge. The judge says he couldn't deal with me. I went through 3 judges that day and they locked me up overnight. And then I got released on bail next day and then finished the paperwork. But I invoiced them. So they are, if you go to Dun & Bradstreet, you can see the court system, the governments and all their ministries are corporation governments. And when you understand that, they're doing trade, they're doing commerce. So legal is nothing more than commerce. It's not law. God's law is equity. And God gave us stewards for his trust and administrating his trust. So I go to court, I said, full disclosure, yep. Can the Crown, not the judge, can the Crown show me the contract where the living man has transferred the contract between God and man to the Crown? And they say, what contract? We don't have a contract. Well, then I move motion to dismiss the case for want of fact. It's that simple. You don't go into argument. You don't go in, you just stay on the question side of the creditor. Are you a male, Graham?
I'm a man.
You're a man.
You're not tricking me anymore.
So you're a man. So it's up to me to prove that you're not a man.
Yep.
But before you get into that argument, there's one question before that, is show me the contract between you and me.
Yep. And
there is none. So the arguments and the stories and the justifications go bye-bye. So if you grab a bit of paper and you draw a square, a rectangle, and below the rectangle, you put BEDS, beds. Above the rectangle, you put OARS underneath each other. And then the rectangle is the results. You write results in them. So what does BEDS mean? BEDS means blame, excuses, denial, and slavery. So we're what we call in the titty sucking. We want somebody else to step up to be cause. So we're stuck in this victim mentality. We're born as God's sons and daughters. We're born as creators. We've got to learn to grow up and be the creator of our own mastership. You can't serve two masters. So stop serving the government as your master. Stop going to court asking for a determination from a master. We don't go and make applications. We make orders. First, we have assembly and we make orders. And then we present that to the courts as an order and turn him as a trustee because we're the master. That's what equity law states. Rule of law. We come together as a body of people. We make orders by trust, by putting resolutions up there, voting on them, passing them, or denying them. And once we carry them, we then submit them and give the government their orders. In the absence of those orders, they're carrying out to do what they want to do. We invoice them and we do a lien on them because they're a company.
Right.
You got $1 million lien on a company in equity and rule of law, they're going to have to pay their debts, or we can do a merger and takeover.
Yeah.
So we have BEDS, and then we have titty suckers who are just victims. They just want somebody to go, wham, wham, where's my job? Wham, wham, where's my representation? You've got to learn to get above the line. And always represent, we've got to re-educate ourselves in beliefs, language. We've got to get our own dictionary of words. And then A is accountability. We've got to be accountable for our time, our energy, and what we invest that in as cause, not as a victim. Responsibility is the ability to respond. So law in equity and in rule of law is we've got to get organized, we've got to be accountable. Get out to your community, set up your common law, not your common law, your equity jurisdictions, and start organizing your communities and make orders and tell the police what you're ordering them to do. And S is success. So what's the most important letter in success, Graham?
I don't know. Tane, tell me. I'm too scared to answer.
U. It's the letter U.
Yeah.
So you and the rest of the letters that make up you is your networks.
Right.
So people are successful based on their networks. Poor people will hang with poor people. Middle class will hang with middle class. Rich will hang with rich. Wealthy will hang with wealthy. The only thing that separates those is your language, your perceptions, your habits, your belief systems, your actions. You've got to, if it's not working for you, change those things. Go hang. Like I was dyslexic for 28 years of my life. I learned what I learned was going into environments because we're all products of our environment. So I realized how hard my family worked and I didn't want to work that hard. I had to get another environment. I learned, I studied forensically and found another group that did things differently. Like, who's more intelligent, a house or a human being?
Well, you would think, I would say, most people would say a human being.
No, it's not. It's a house. The house stays at home and sends a human out to work for it and keep it in a lifestyle it wants to be kept in. Because that's what the government's taught us in school, to work hard, retire with a gold watch, and life's over. The wealthy, they make money work for them. There's a word called leverage. And this is what the government's done. They've harvested us from the wild as First Nations, and they domesticated it. And then we work for them. We they get their money from us, they get their taxes from us, they just keep invoicing us for licenses, for this, for that. We're always paying out. They've got the point of leverage. The beast is controlling us through leverage, and they're educating us that that's the way life is, and it isn't. A tree doesn't go to school to learn to be a creator of apples or fruits. It goes within and learns from God how to be the creator. And that's where we're making this mistake. We're not going into ourselves to learn God's language, his dictionary, in equity law, and then making rule of law with multiply. It says in the scriptures that go forth and multiply and add. It doesn't say divide and rule. In nature, everything works in synergy. We get taught competition. And the trouble with competition in the context of maritime law is there's only one winner. In equity and rule of law, we're all winners because we're practicing synergy. We're practicing love. We're practicing creation. How can you ask questions of your team or your community? What can we do to survive? How can we join together and cooperate rather than compete? So law is about natural laws from God. And I'm not talking religion. I'm talking about a language. You know, if you want to learn creation, the First Nation originals lived here for millions of years without hospitals, without disease, and they were in balance with nature, and they were in balance with energy. You know what? You know, when I've walked amongst the First Nations, what they can create out of nothing is amazing. They've got a relationship with the water. They've got a relationship with the song lines of the planet. They've got relationship with thunder, wind, everything. They've got a synergized relationship and a language. They're not competing. And when you get that mindset of spiritual, it's everything yet nothing. Now, there's a great guy called Neville Goddard and Florence Bell Shin. You can look this up on YouTube, and they go and they teach you the laws and how to manifest. And it's no different to First Nations around the world. You know, you look at the American Indians, you look at anyone, they have that synergy with nature. And it's time that we move out of being domesticated under maritime law and being a victim into equity, into rule of law. You know, a lady called Lee Masters has created this beautiful rule of law software package, and you can register in there and put your injury in there, and the group will come together and make a determination. And we need more of those in every area. Everyone, all the communities coming together and making laws and filing them into the system and turning the police as your service providers. They're a police force under your guidance and service. If they're not servicing you, that's what synergy is, service energy.
All right, we're almost out of time for today, and I'm going to get you back, and we'll talk more about this. If you could sum up in a couple of words, and I know that's hard for you because you've got lots of words to say, but what is the main, I suppose, action that we need to take to remove ourselves from maritime law and place ourselves in rule of law?
Okay, the first thing is to go to Death, Births and Marriages and ask for your photographic copy of the born certificate from the hospital. You've got to get rid of your last name. Do not ever, from this day on, if you're serious, never use your last name, surname. Put non-applicable, NA. You don't have it. And the evidence, always carry around your born certificate, and it says that you're John Henry from them. They've acknowledged you as the born equity contractor, the creditor. Stop using your last name. Remove it from the system. Go to the driver's license. If you want a driver's license, have your first name. So it's on record that you're the creditor. In fact, I don't have a driver's license. I don't have a number plate on my car. I don't feed the beast at all. And in the coming segments that Graham's going to do with me, I'm going to show you how I do it and why. I was in court because the policeman thought he was smarter than I. He took me to court. The judge, I filed the paperwork and the judge left the court because he has no jurisdiction of the living.
Okay.
So you've got to get yourself and identify yourself in the language of the living and ask questions. Like Graham, we practice asking questions. So what are the questions? What, where, when, how, and who? What, where, when, how, and who?
Yep.
So what's your name, Graham? Full name?
My name is Graham Patrick of the House of Jeffs.
See, straight away you made the statement instead of asking
what do you want to know
the
for?
question. What do you mean by name? We're just parrots. We've got to train our minds to stop being the parrot and ask the question. We've got to go back to the 2-year-old asking questions. We're so constipated, we need to unconstipate ourselves spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically, and just be, I am, the question.
Yep.
And that's, before our next segment, everyone practice with your family. Just ask questions, answer everything they ask you with a question. First one that makes a statement washes up or makes dinner or buys dinner. And you start educating and training. If you don't exercise your muscles, they become useless, rendered. So practice questions. Go get your born certificate from the hospital and invoice anyone that has a dealing with you as an offer. Invoice them. Ask the question, show me where I got the contract. And by the way, here's an invoice with my fees for the services of continuation. So I know it's not just 1 or 2 words, but they're the 3 elements you need to practice, right? Does that make sense?
It does, mate. And we're going to have to finish there, but I thank you for today. And as you mentioned, we're going to do a series of these interviews and we'll get a little bit more in depth. If anyone's got any questions, they can email them to us. I'll put the email in the text of this video when it's published. And thanks for your time today, Tane. And I suppose, what do you think our chances are of getting our world back in hands of the people?
Look, I haven't done 30 years of forensics and battling not to think for 1 minute that I'm not going to get our land and our earth back. We've just got to practice the Exodus program where we walk out of the jurisdiction of maritime and jurisprudence.
Yep.
We've got to walk out of our heads and belief systems and our language. That's the Exodus. We've got to move out of our heads and our language and go to the promised land of the new language.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And your famous saying is we have with maritime law is that we're lost souls or dead souls on the sea. And
correct.
Just want to explain that.
Yeah. Well, again, it's language. How do you spell sea? There's 2 ways, S-E-A and S-E-E. The Holy See is the administrator called the Pope. And he has licensed the United Nations for the administration of the dead on the sea under the Cesta VQ Trust. So you've got to understand language and words. And I, for years, go into Google and I look up legal definition for person, for example, and it says entity, corporate entity, and you go out to the public here and you say, are you a person? They go, yeah, I'm a person. And they don't know the word's meaning. So you're saying you're a corporation, an entity. No, I'm a person. See, people don't understand language and what they're using. And I can go in how you make a word. See, I went to scholars and said, I'll give you the letter A-P-P-L-E, letters. I want you to make a word. And they say, what do you mean? I said, well, I've given you the letters of the alphabet. Now I want you to make a word. Apple. But how'd you make it? I don't know, Tony. It's just one of those things. I said, let me put it this way. If I gave you 5 bricks and I said, go make a house, what would you need? Oh, some sand and mortar. Okay. So let's go back to the letters. What's the sand and the mortar? And they go, I don't know. I say, it's experience. The government sends you off to their schools to give you their experience to domesticate you. In the First Nations, you went out in the bush and you learned to communicate with nature. You built your language based on the experiences. And that's the separation between being domesticated and being a First Nations, because you built your own dictionary. You're not working out of somebody else's dictionary.
Right. So in maritime law, we're dead soul on the sea. What are we in rule of law?
You're the native people.
What do you always tell me?
And you're living man.
What you refer to that as land standing up?
It's called, in Māori, it's called tangata whenua, which is land standing up, because your mother hunted for the food to build the vessel, the meat body. She built a vessel in 9 months, and then you entered it, and now you become land standing up, walking the land. Dust to dust, you return the land back to the land, and then you go off to wherever you think you go off to. So it's land standing up. So in trust law, your body is the trust. Your 5 senses are the trustees. And the spirit, the beneficiary, is the beneficiary. So the beneficiary controls the senses and tells the body what to do. That's cause. Now, no government can control the spirit. They can't. So they control the persona and the language of which you use and your belief systems. So you think that you're free, but you're actually in a barbed wire fence, walking to the cow shed every day, fed and exchange something and then released until your next milking shed. Or you're a chicken being watered, fed, lights turned on, and your exchange is an egg, and then you start the cycle. And you're domesticated. I want you to hear you're in a context of domestication. The government around the world have taken the First Nations and domesticated them. So I did a workshop and I said to some First Nations, I said, if you've got a birth certificate, stand up and go to the right of the room. There was only one person, sorry, there was only one First Nation entity that was left, and he didn't have that. And he was the only creditor in the room. The rest were dead and debtors and being administrated by the state or trust.
We're going to leave it there because we're going to go and open another kettle of or another can of worms. So thanks again for your time today. And for those of you out there that have watched this, this is really important. I mean, we have never been closer to discovering what we need to do. And there's going to be a lot more education and information packed into these. We're working with First Nations in Australia and in New Zealand to get our systems right so that we can educate everyone back to the land. And that's what it's all about. So thanks, Tane. Thanks everyone for watching, and please share this video and keep an eye open because there's more to come. So watch this space. Thanks all. See you later, Tane. Bye, mate.
Thank you.